Well, I'll keep pressing on here, but you will not offend me if you have to stand up and whatever. I'm going to try to accelerate this a little bit because I want to show you this video. Then I want to take some questions, and I'll be around as long as you have questions or whatever. So I want to be respectful of your time and the afternoon and the people watching. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this map. And Kevin, this is the one I mentioned at lunch that you're going to want to get. We have a high-resolution copy of this. For those of you that with really good eyes, you might see the date in the upper right-hand corner, 1778. It's one of the first maps of any kind that I can find that has specific references to the Comanche or the Utes. And I'm going to step away because I think my microphone will reach over here. Everybody still hear me if I'm walking over here? It still works. And these little icons, you won't be able to see this very well where you're at, although this is really clear. So you can see there's 4 teepees here, there's 3 over here. What those teepees are what we think is like an icon. And if you have 3, we're guessing most teepees would have 8 to 10 to 12 people, usually in the same family, extended family. So we're thinking that when the Spanish made this map in 1778, there's a scale here of size of the encampment. So when you have 4, that might represent 40 people in that camp. Here's one that might be 60. And the Spanish language is spelled Y-U-T-A-S. So the Utahs were the name that the Spanish gave the Ute people. The Ute never referred to themselves as the Utes. That name happened when the Spanish got here. The Utes always referred to themselves as the Nooch, N-U-C-H-E, or sometimes you see that spelled differently. Again, they don't have a written language, so their translation is, if I'm a French trapper and I'm trying to write, what Ladonna said her tribe is, I'm trying to phonetically, write that in my French language, and then it's translated. So this is Spanish to orientate you where we're at today. This is like a 4-state area, so this is northern New Mexico. Albuquerque is down here, Santa Fe, Taos. So this is the Rio Grande. That's the Colorado River. So this is coming up through Arizona and coming into Colorado. And what you see here, and this is really extraordinary, if people haven't studied this map from the Spanish, this is where the conquistadors are following these 2 major rivers inland. And not only are they coming from the west, northeast, from the south, east, north, and west, but they're converging 3-dimensionally in altitude right up the spine of the Rocky Mountains, the Continental Divide. So we're seeing these headwaters that are flowing down, forming these major streams. Streams go into the creeks, go into the rivers to become major rivers, emptying into the Caspian Sea with the Rio Colorado, for the Colorado River, and the Rio Grande in the Gulf of Mexico. So what was of interest for the Spanish, as well as the indigenous people, was where these headwaters come from. And they come from the ancient homeland of the Ute. And that homeland extended from northern New Mexico all the way to Wyoming, from the Great Plains out here, all the way to Utah, eastern Utah. So a huge, huge 4-state area. So this river here, Rio de Nastis, is the Spanish for the Arkansas River. Many of you know that. And if you're looking above where Fountain Creek would come in, where there's this mountain up here, 5 teepees, the writing is C-U-M-A-C-H-I-E, Comanche, would be more the French pronunciation, and that's for the Comanche, what we know the Comanche. The Ute claim, and this is through Dr. Jefferson again, linguistics expert on indigenous languages, particularly the Native Americans, American Southwest. Spent 4 years at the Smithsonian helping them interpret their photo and archive collection. So he claims that the Comanche were given their name by the Ute, and it translates to mean he who wants to fight me all the time. Because the Comanche, very warlike, and they would raid if they were Spanish settlements or if they were other Native American people. and they became known as the horse lords of the plains, because once they acquired the horse from the Spanish, they were nearly invincible until Juan Bautista de Anza came along in 1779. So we have from the Front Range east, controlled mostly by the Comanche, and this area from northern New Mexico across South Park, Middle Park, North Park, all the way into Utah by the Utes. And when the Utes were encountered by the Mormons, they had a lot in common. And so the reason why the name Utah comes about is in honoring the Ute. The Y gets dropped, and usually it's pronounced Ute with no S on the end for either plural or singular or referring to the nation. So a wonderful map. And again, along the passes and the river crossings, El Bandido is on here, for example. You're familiar with that crossing. And that's where we're finding a lot of the trail marker trees still existing today. Bruce, let's go to the next slide. At lunch I was talking about this. One of the things you have to do is to rule out natural causes first, and that's hard to do, if you haven't really studied this. But I created this diagram, this V chart. We refer to this as a culture modified tree, CMT verification chart, because of this V. And who really deserves credit for this is Dr. Lois Adams. She's from Levita. That's where she and her husband live now. She was a career educator. And she said, John, children really need something visual to hang on to that you can make a copy of, that they can fold up in their backpack or whenever they're hiking. And she said, this makes sense to you, but you need something that they can walk through. So together we developed this V chart. So you've got to rule out natural causes. Could this have been caused by deer or elk or porcupines, that gnaw on a young tree and reshape it? Is there a possibility of heavy snow load or wind, something that shapes that, or could have been hit by lightning or disease? In Black Forest, where I'm from, we have a lot of dwarf mistletoe. So you have to make sure that this tree wasn't distorted from any of those causes from recent man-made, like road construction. This is a trail marker tree that has you leaving Levita and going to Coachella. It's right off of the highway, and it's pointed right at Levita Pass. But you have to make sure it's so close to the highway. You have to make sure that this couldn't have been hit by a snowplow or something like that. Especially if it's got teal bark, and this one doesn't. But once you've eliminated these natural causes, the further up the right side of this V you can go, the more confidence you can have in what you found is a culturally modified tree. So you want to look to see, is it even old enough? Well, it has to be at least over 100 years old to really qualify. Where's the location? Is it pointing towards a trail? Is there a source of water? Is there some orientation of significance here in the distance? Are there other culturally modified trees around? Because a lot of times what you'll find, a trail marker tree will point to another one, and you get over to that one, and it could be several hundred yards, and you're looking at another trail marker tree, and you see another bent tree off in the distance, and when you get to that one, you realize that, wait a minute, there's a trail I didn't know was here. Or you come across what looks like might be a camping area. We found teepee rings and fire pits and petroglyphs and a medicine wheel I'll show here in a minute. So are there other stone features, any Native American artifacts found in that area? Are there tie-down marks? And I'll show you better examples of that, or any P.O. bar. Bruce, let's go to the next one, please. What most of the Native American people, particularly the Ute, the Cheyenne Arapaho, the Plains Indians, used to tie the trees down was Yucca Cordage. That's braided. Probably most of you are aware of this. The yucca fibers, once you braid those, it becomes very, very stiff, and that's what the Indians would use for eagle snares. They used it for rabbit traps, reins for the horses. So this cordage is very durable, very lightweight, so they carried this with them, had multiple uses. So this cordage was holding together these magnificent projectile points. Now this was found along with this elk rosin bag here in a cave in Utah, not too far from the Bears Ears. So it was sheltered, so the cordage was never exposed to snow and sunlight and so on. So the projectile points have been dated to be 900 years old. So this cordage can last a long time. Let's go to the next one, please. So when they were bending a young tree over, a sapling, they would drive a wooden stake in the ground, and then they would tie this cordage around the tree and stake it to the tree in the ground, the stake in the ground. And it's just like if you take baling wire or bob wire, on a little tree, and you wrap it around the trunk of that tree. And as the tree grows, you come back and take that baling wire off, and it leaves this indentation in the bark. And especially if you have a tree that's being bent in a particular direction, on the inside of that curve, the recessed area, the indentation in the bark, is much more pronounced than it is on the back side. And so they didn't have 4 yucca tie-downs on this tree. They had 1, and as the tree is growing, they returned, probably seasonal, probably the next year. And as the tree was growing, they would adjust the yucca cordage, that tie-down, to the next one, then the tree's growing. Notice this, this is like twice the width of that one. So maybe they got twice as much water, and it caused the tree to grow twice as fast. Or, this is just a guess on my part, maybe they missed 1 year, and they came back 2 years later to make that adjustment. But you can see the indentation here, and then the 4th one. And the 4th one is probably the closest one. That was with the direct line of where it was being staked down. So the tree's growing, seeking sunlight, which they would do naturally. 4 is an important number with the Ute. They recognize the 4 cardinal directions. When they first modified the tree, this would be done in prayer. They believe that the prayer tree can retain the prayer spiritually. So when they return to modify the tree next year and the next year, that would also be done with prayer, seeking consent to Creator of the tree. So each time they return, there were more prayers added on top of the prayers that were there before. So the tree, as it gets older, can be very powerful, very sacred to the Ute people because it contains all the prayers of the ancestors going back centuries. Next one, Bruce. This is a burial tree. Now again, this is typically not something you're going to see written in the Ute language or written by a Ute person, but we confirmed this with several Ute people, and what they claim, the story here, is as the tree was selected, it's bent in 2 directions. So there's a 90-degree bend and then another 90-degree bend. So we walked around the front of the tree to take that picture over there. So this is the same tree from the front and the back. So I want to show the 2 90-degree bends. What the Ute explained that the 2 bends are in referencing, the story goes, is that we all come from Mother Earth alike. We all travel, we'll walk across the earth alike. And at the end of life, we all ascend to Creator. So that's the 3 directions. And with almost every Ute I've ever met, that path of coming from Mother Earth physically, walking across the earth in life, and then ascending to Creator, that's not a question. That's an absolute imperative. That's taken as an absolute fact. And so where many traditions, religions, Methodist is a good example. I think people there, I was obviously raised Methodist, that's a strong Methodist mother, that's where that John Wesley comes from. So you spend a lot of time in many Christians, debating, discussing, is there heaven and is there God or whatever. You never hear that with any of the Native American people that I've ever been around. The fact that there is a Creator, that there is an afterlife, that's an absolute. And if you say, well, do you think there's a Creator? Look at you like you're nuts. Well, of course there is. How can there not be? But it's a fascinating culture that's different than my own that I've really come to respect. How the burial tree is made is 2 opposing forces. So what they've done is they would take, it's called a thong, And we know that term from the Cherokee because they were one of the few Native Americans who had an alphabet. From 1820 on, Chief Sequoyah created the Cherokee Alphabet, 240 characters, and it is not an easy language to learn. I wouldn't even know where to begin. But because we have that language from 1820 on, we get glimpses in writing of how the Cherokee described the trees with the 290-degree bends, where they're using this thong that's like a big slingshot, and they're driving it into the ground. This tree is very young and pliable, and they're bending the tree over that first bend, and then at the desired length, they're driving the wooden stake in the ground, they're tying the tree down, and knowing that'll grow a secondary leader, that secondary trunk. And then if you look around the front, what they're doing is after that leader continues growing, they're returning and they're girdling around that primary. And a forester who was very skeptical about these trees, he said, John, after we've been in the field, he said, this is probably the best evidence that these trees were modified by human hands that I've ever seen. When we have these girdling marks, it shows that someone purposely redirected this tree with a human-caused cut. Where they start at the top, you can see there's a cut mark, and then a cut mark, and a cut mark. Goes all the way around that primary trunk. And that had to have been done to remove all of the bark, to kill off that part of the tree. After the tree is grown the secondary trunk, that's the secondary trunk here. What's amazing with this one is it had 4 other trees around it. There was a 4th tree, or 5th tree, right here. You can just barely see the stump on this slide. And somebody, when they were putting this in, power wall lines, they came along and cut that 5th piece down. They could have just as easily, moved that, 10 yards or 5 yards, one direction or the other. Sure, they had no idea that that was a culturally modified tree that they were cutting down, which is one of the reasons we need more people to talk, about preserving these trees and learning what we can while we still have access to them and the elders. Next one, please, Bruce. Some people say, oh, this is nonsense. These trees aren't even old enough. When the pioneers got here, they clear cut all the forests. Well, this tree is not too far from Fox Run, El Paso County, and Black Forest. This tree, when we first found it, was standing dead. We think it had been dead about 20, 25 years. I don't really know how long it's been dead. It was a quick growing range, once it died. But what I do know is when we got permission from the landowner to extract what's called a cookie, that's this cross-section at the base of the tree. As the tree is growing, it's growing from the top up. So you're going to have fewer rings the higher up the tree you go. So the best count is where the tree first started growing near the base. It's adding a ring every year. So the first ring is called the pith ring, year 0, and it's growing 1 ring and then the next ring and the next ring. So as it's growing out, you can see a ruler at the top. There's about 2.5 inches between the pith ring and this darkened ring here. Does anybody know what that dark ring might be? Anybody make a guess? It's a fire scar. Notice that after that fire scar, the wood changes a little different color. It goes to kind of this bluish green tinge. Does anybody know what caused that? I wouldn't have either. It's the Rocky Mountain pine beetle. So what happened after that tree had lived for about 250 years, it survived a fire, and then it grew another 110 rings before it died. I would have thought beetle kill would have killed the tree based on nothing at all that I had to refer to. I would have thought it would kill the tree maybe in the first 3 to 5 years. But to live over another century, that's pretty amazing. And then to die. So this tree that was modified probably within the first, 20 years of its life by human hands gives us a general date of in the late 1600s was when it was modified. Next slide, please, Bruce. So the trees are definitely old enough, regardless of what some people say. And they're extraordinarily advanced in using the trees. Everybody's familiar with petroglyphs, rock art, probably everybody's familiar with that, can be used for solstice alignments, equinox, this young Ute guide here is pointing towards this spiral formation. This whole panel, it extends out here probably for another 15, 20 yards with all this magnificent rock art. And on the summer solstice, when the setting sun, above his right shoulder is a piece of the rock outcropping, and it casts a shadow, and that's what he's explaining with his hand. And that shadow, as the sun goes down, walks all the way across that panel. It's almost like a moving picture. And so each petroglyph has a different story. So we know that they used rocks, petroglyphs, for hundreds of years. This is an ancient one. That rust color is called desert patina. So we know where they've etched into the rock face on top of the desert patina. That's taken many years to grow the patina. So we can date it that way. Next one, please. What the Ute elders have taught us is that their ancestors used trees for a clock, a calendar, and a compass. So this is two trees that are planted close together. We're also told that the ancient Ute knew how to plant trees, transplant trees, and graft branches from one tree to another tree. So what we're seeing is two trees uncharacteristically growing very close together, and they leave this little slit, and then above that slit, the trees have grown together, they're fused. So you have this little shaft of light, the sunlight that comes down, that's only visible on the spring equinox, March 21st, and the fall equinox. The only days you can see a shaft of light are on the spring and the fall equinox. And why those were important for the Ute, who are migratory, they knew where they needed to be with the vernal equinox or the autumn equinox, going to whatever elevations that they could. The tree on the right is an amazing tree. This is tall. I don't have a scale here, but when I stand here, my head comes about to here. So it's probably a good 12, 14 feet to that first bend. So it's leaving an opening of about 18 inches to 2 feet, and it's kind of a square shape. And so east is to my right behind me, and west over here. So in the morning, that sun casts a long shadow. And as you stand there, we learned this from you elders, Dr. Jefferson again, and he says, if you stand here in the morning, you'll see that the sun's got this long shadow, not a surprise. But as the sun goes across the sky, he says you'll see the shadows get shorter, and then after midday, the shadows begin to get longer. So you'll know if it's morning, early morning, noon, or whatever. That's not a surprise. What is a surprise is as you watch this shadow right here coming off that tree, in the morning and the evening, you can't see the shadow with that opening, only until it starts advancing into midday, and you get a full opening at noon. At noon, when you can see that full opening of that shadow on that tree, that's pointing precisely at north. So you're also getting a compass heading of north. For migratory purposes, that's important to know which directions north and what time of day and what season you're in or going into. Next one, please. So a very sophisticated culture that we're using these trees for very specific purposes. We also are finding extraordinary stone features and following where the trail marker trees are pointing. As you're going from from Morrison, Denver area west along the 285 corridor, West Jefferson County, like if you're going over Kenosha Pass, most of you have probably been over Kenosha Pass. It's an Indian word, it means water jug. An elder said what that is telling the Ute people, if you're going over Kenosha Pass, bring your Kenosha, your water jug. You'll need to fill it up because there's water on this side and that side, but there isn't any at the top. So that's where the place name comes from, Indian name. But so on the way to Kenosha Pass off the 285 corridor is this magnificent medicine wheel, and probably similar to other medicine wheels, it is divided with 4 axes from the center stone, and you have a ring of stones around it. These are perfectly aligned with the north, south, east, west axis on true north, not magnetic north, true north. So they had to have been aligned off of the North Star because even if they were carrying a compass, that'd be off 11 to 15 degrees, depends on. We're standing with this magnificent stone, centered stone, which is sacred. So most indigenous people recognize 7 directions, the 4 cardinal directions, down, up, and here now, the center. So those are the sacred directions. Next one, please. So we have Dr.